Hello, everybody. Well, this is tonight's topic is ancient Greek art, and I can definitely tell you at least one of the slides from the list that I don't cut. When we review in a week for the midterm, I will of course give you a reduced list. I'll cut, like I've been promising, about 40%, 30 to 40% of all the slides from the original syllabus. But I will have several tonight, as I often have in the past, that I will tell you heads up when you start to take notes that this is one that you definitely don't want to uh, not take. In other words, do take good notes, extra thorough notes on, because the odds are very high that that would be one of the slides on the midterm. Very interesting image there. Okay. We have a few other things to go over before this. And well, we'll see if we get a few people joining us later than usual. But let's do this. I'm going to do the speaker view just for a couple minutes before we get started. Because tonight's, we should be able to finish, I don't know, 5 or 10 minutes early, depending on how many questions you guys have. Okay, but first, of course, your papers are due. They're coming up, so it's on the Monday next week, 1 week from tonight, the 27th. So since this is the last class before the due date, I want to make sure everyone's clear on the process of how to submit them, as well as have a chance to ask any questions that are on your mind about the requirements. You should have written at least part of the paper by now. I hope at least you certainly would have. I would assume everyone picked a topic, found your sources, put together some kind of bibliography, and at least outline what you want to say. If you're at that point, you're in good shape. And also, you all have this option. All my students, I've always done this. You can forward to me, now that we're online, it would have to be as a PDF, a sample of what you've written at any point, whether it's half of it or a semi-final draft. But if you want me to give you feedback about whether you're missing anything, that would be, valuable input for you before you turn the final version in. Please don't wait till the Sunday before it's due. Get back to me by at least sometime like Friday night, because then sometime no later than Sunday afternoon. I don't check my emails on Saturday. It's my family day, family time. I'm sure you all have similar things where you have to have a day off. So I don't check my email between Friday night and Sunday late afternoon, early evening. So I'd get back to you if you sent me something after 5 on Friday. I'd get back to you around that time on Sunday. If you want to do that, remember it has to be a PDF. Okay, but now's a good chance for anyone who has any questions about anything relating to the requirements for the paper. I still have this thing I always like to hold up, which is how to submit them, right? But first, anybody have any questions?
I do.
Yes, go ahead.
So I don't have I left my stuff in the other room. I need to go grab it, but I don't have it in front of me. But we needed, what do you say, like 3 sources other than the books that we have for the class, right? Correct?
Exactly.
Now, is that sources about the artist or specifically about the piece, or
it can be
some of both?
Well, we kind of briefly or somewhat discussed that, but yeah, that's a good thing to recap on that. It can be anything that relates to how you analyze the work of art, in particular the meaning, because every work of art, it does, we don't know, especially in ancient, but remember, you don't have to write about anything from the period we cover.
I'm not doing ancient, but I'm doing something from 1925, and I've been
then you know the name of the artist, because then that's part of what you can include, is anything about
because the trick I've had so far, I mean, I've really just started getting into it here recently, though, is trying to find stuff that was definitely in print. There's tons of stuff online, but I'm trying to get it confirmed.
Yeah, I understand
that it was in print.
Well, if I can ask, unless you'd rather not say who the artist was, or do you?
Yeah, I'm doing a Dolly.
Oh,
but I'm not doing. I'm not doing one of. Easy. I'm not doing one of his surrealist things like I thought I would.
Here's a tip for you. Yeah, either under surrealism or just his name. Encyclopedia Britannica still publishes, well, I'm not sure, but the last time I checked a year or so ago, actual print editions, plus they post them online every time.
I was actually just reading that right before class.
then there you go. There's your your originally printed source, and then you just say originally from a printed source or printed
All right.
edition. You can say it that way. And then of course you access it to a website, so you put the URL. Yeah, that'll work. That's good. So in other words, anything relating to whatever part of the meaning you analyze in your paper. Now, some people do that for the formal analysis too, but usually by now it's pretty straightforward. You know, or I hope everyone has been who's been focused on each lecture and read the 9 elements and watched the second week when I described how to use them. By now, you should be able to do that on your own. So most people don't need to have sources referenced from the bibliography in the formal analysis, but you might choose to quote some critic who said something about that piece of art or that artist, and the techniques that would have to come under the formal elements that they used. But most of the time that's for the meaning section. So that can be about the life of the artist, the style of the artwork, the historical period they lived in, or the exact meaning of that work. Okay, I hope that helps.
Yes.
Good. Sure. That's what I wanted to do before we get going on the first slide. Anybody else? Any other questions about your papers or anything else relating to extra credit? I've had people ask, I will be proactive and say, this came up with my afternoon class, which is, oh, what if I went to Spain or wherever, Mexico or somewhere back east, and I went to either a museum or an architecture site and I have photos from before the semester. I'd kind of have to draw the line somewhere. So, you can go back to pictures of you when you were a kid and your parents put you in front of a statue or something. It has to be during this semester. That's a reasonable requirement, I think. So you've got so many chances. The museums are open again in San Francisco. Just normal precautions with masking and social distancing, what have you. And you do have to RSVP. I don't think you can just show up and walk in. So they can time the number of people in that get in every 15 minutes, whatever. It's pretty straightforward. You go to their website. So you can do that twice, and you don't have to write anything. Somebody thought you had to write 2 pages about your museum visit. No, that's if you watch a movie or a documentary about an artist or a work of art. The life of that artist or what you learned about that type of art would qualify where you'd have 2 pages if you do that option. Welcome. We're just talking about the requirements for extra credit at the moment, and we'll get started with the first slide in just about 2 minutes or whatever time it takes to answer your questions. Yeah, so in other words, the only requirement for writing anything is with the film option, and that's at least 60 minutes about, and it can be fictional if there's some fact-based. I know that's a gray area. You can check with me if you're not sure. There are movies about Van Gogh. There must be a dozen. And about half of them are pretty accurate and realistic. And some of the others, even one about him falling in love with a painter. He comes back to life. Nah, that wouldn't be something I would want you to waste your time on writing about or watching it. Well, actually, it wasn't that bad a movie for a cornball. I think it was 80s rom-com or something. I don't remember the title. My wife and I watched it and laughed halfway through it. So anyway, the point is that it has to be serious and, some information about that artist or that type of art or that work of art of at least 60 minutes. A documentary will do, of course, or feature films like Frida about Frida Kahlo, or Lust for Life, the best film ever made about Van Gogh, still the first one ever made. And it still is the gold standard. It's superb. It won several Academy Awards for the main actors. And you'll see why if you watch that. Lust for Life. It's 2 hours and it'll go by like that because every scene, it just grabs your attention. The dialogue, well, the guy won a Pulitzer Prize for the book that it was based on. So he was a historian who slightly fictionalized some things because we don't know every detail of Van Gogh's conversations, but we have a lot of evidence from his letters to his brother. So things like that. Or extra credit movie or film option, that's when you need to write 2 pages for 10 points extra credit. But for the museum visit or the architecture visit, you just need to write the name of the place, and it'll prove the day you were there. If it's a museum, you'll show me a screenshot or a PDF of the receipt or the ticket stub. And if it's an architecture site, you'll have the 4 photos, color photos, and then just say the name of the place, the location, and your name and class. Okay, last thing now, unless there are other questions, which I, as always, will stick around after the last slide to answer any other questions that come up at the end. This is how you need to submit these. Now, of course, this is 2.1. Obviously, you can adjust. You guys can all, I mean, I want to rewrite this 3 or 4 different times when I, teach as many as 4 different classes at the JC. So obviously for you, it would be Art 2.1, short paper, no space, right? All together. And then number 1, of course, underline last name, comma, first name as a PDF. And yes, you need to attach the cover sheet. Somebody asked me if that's important. Oh yeah, can't grade them without it. Can't grade them without the cover sheet. So
you want us to email
the
all that in?
Yeah, the cover sheet should be, if you can, most people can write whatever the word is, attach electronically or join into the same file or add into the same file. The cover sheet is your first page of that PDF, then the paper, then the bibliography, and you put the illustration, doesn't matter at the beginning or the end, before or after the body of your paper. So that should all be one file, so we can all go together and be graded together. If sometimes people have trouble doing that, I can accept the cover sheet as a separate second PDF, but that really causes a lot of hassle, slows us down the grading between me and the reader. So please try to do that as a single file with the cover sheet. And remember, the deadline is midnight on Monday, so you have till after class over. But if I were you, I'd want to get that off my plate by the time class starts next Monday. Then pivot to how we're going to do, how the test, the midterm, is going to be given, to review for it and how to study. And of course, that is an open book, open note test. But still, people don't always get A's and B's, even with that easy added additional advantage of an online class. You still have to study and have good notes, of course, to do a good job on either the midterm or the final. All right, one more time. Anybody have any questions you urgently need to have me answer before we start the first slide? All right, we're going to talk about ancient Greek art, but we're going to start with Aegean art. So technically speaking, we're not going to get to the Greek slides until later. But let's put this up in the corner. There we go. And enlarge this. Okay. This is the first must-know slide for tonight. It's a female figure. Actually, the ancient Greek art is next week. I'm sorry, I misspoke. It's next week. Yeah. But this is still what could be on the midterm tonight. Week 6, of course. The first slide is listed there. Female figure, 2 words, just like it sounds. Female figure. The location is some Greek islands that are called Cyclades. CYCLADES. And the date is 2500 BC or BCE. Okay, this is a prehistoric work. It almost sounds odd to say that in connection with early Greek art, but this is before there were any Greek cities. In fact, most of what we think of as, the early Greek culture didn't exist yet. So where was this created? It was created on one of the islands in the Aegean Sea, and that is a word you should see from the syllabus. I'll spell it for you. It's the Eastern Mediterranean, AEGEAN. So that's our main topic for tonight, Aegean art. I was jumping the gun when I mentioned classical Greek art is for next week. Okay, so what we're looking at is a female figure, and there are several clues, not only about the obvious identification of this figure as a female figure in ancient, early or even prehistoric islands, Greek islands, I should say, art. The Cycladic culture is what these people were called. Cycladic culture. Okay, good. Okay, welcome. Yeah, you didn't miss much. We're just now getting going on the first slide tonight, so you didn't miss. This is from week 6, female figure, Cyclades. That's the location, but this is called Cycladic with an IC art because that's the kind of culture that we don't know a lot about, but we have some evidence. They were a prehistoric island culture that occupied some of what today are part of Greece, but back then they were just a chain of islands called the Cyclades in the Eastern Mediterranean. Well, that doesn't tell you much about the meaning, does it? So what is the meaning of this? Well, we have evidence from the burial site where this was found. It was found in a burial site. Probably this was a prominent woman, a female member of that, uh, culture, maybe even a member of the ruling class of that particular culture, the Cycladic island culture. Why do many historians think that? I actually think that too. Well, look at her pose. What do you notice about her pose? The way she's positioned here from her, you know.
She looks authoritative.
Yeah, that's a good word. Excellent word for it. Authoritative. She definitely seems like she has a strong sense of self-confidence, and authoritative is actually an excellent word that you could use in your notes, or if it's on the exam. She is also, her arms give us some of that evidence, and then also the fact that she's standing straight upright. And even though there are no eyes, right, there's slight hints of indentation, but really there isn't a face here. So let's see, what could we say? Well, there's a nose, there's no mouth, but we can get some sense of her face, or at least her, her head and where her eyes would be if she had eyes. Just say there's a hint of her looking at us directly, just, staring us or giving us a steady gaze directly into our eyes or our face. And, someone who's not, self-confident would probably never do that. So that's the two clues that historians base the theory, and it is just a theory, on that she probably is an upper class woman, or at least an important member of that culture, and possibly from the ruling classes. Now, the fact that she's female is pretty evident, but if it's not obvious, you could write she has breasts, and obviously the area down there for vagina, and that would not be anybody's debating that. Nobody is. It's a female figure. They had male figures also. By the way, this is my own slide. I took it in the Louvre, and just for those of you who might find this worth, this is what's in the same section of the Louvre. I love this piece. I almost made it the must know, but it's not in your, I don't think it's in Stockstead. You don't have to write this, but it's from the same culture, same period. This looks like a abstract sculpture from the 1950s, doesn't it? To me, it literally looks like something you might see. Welcome. We're still on the first month. No, we just started. So the female figure from Cyclades. But this is just a head from the same culture, and yet look how modern it looks. Well, historians, of course, assume it's because they didn't want or know how to take the time to do more detail on the face, on the eyes and the mouth. But it's probably more of a choice, an artistic choice. They just chose to use simplified image to keep it simple. Here we go. Welcome. Yeah, we're just talking about the first slide, the female figure from Cyclades. So it's about, here are the rest of the facts on the meaning. It's about 2 feet tall, and it's made out of volcanic stone, because these islands were once, I don't know if they still are, volcanic. They had quite often volcanic eruptions. Some of the Greek islands still are. You're going to see my slides at the end for about 15 or 20 minutes of the most beautiful island. Well, one of the two. Oahu is pretty high up there in Hawaii. Cuba is too, but one of my 3 favorite islands. It's called Santorini. You may or may not have heard of it, but it is the most beautiful Greek island, hands down. Well, I've only been to about a dozen, so yeah, of those I've seen. And that's where Atlantis was. You're going to see where Atlantis probably was. If there ever was a lost continent of Atlantis, the basis for that was probably the island of Santorini. And that's a giant volcano. The whole island is one giant volcano. I'll show you the evidence of that. And you want to take notes. That'll be the last 15, 20 minutes. Okay, so this sculpture was made from a volcanic stone that comes from a culture called Cycladic island culture, where they were volcanic islands. And we don't know much more about it than that we think she was a member of the ruling classes, or at least an upper class woman, based on her pose. Okay, so that's the whole meaning on this. Formal analysis, pretty straightforward. There isn't any simulated texture here. This is all real rough texture of volcanic rock, right? And the color is cool. It's kind of a grayish color, right? It looks off-white here, but that's a light from the museum. And then we have its balanced. Well, it's a human figure that's basically intact. The only thing missing are the feet, and we think they might have broken off, but we can't be sure. at the bottom. But in any case, what's there that is visible is balanced left to right and roughly top to bottom. Though I've had some students say, wait a minute, this looks wider here, but it depends on where you draw the line, of course, right? So you could see it as balanced both ways, as I do, or maybe slightly weighted toward the top. There's no larger or smaller masses. It's a single mass, of course. The only technique for space is overlapping of the arms, but you do want to say that the sculpture occupies real space, roughly 2 feet tall. Okay, and then we have modeling. Of course, there's only the lighting from the museum. There's no technique for modeling. And there is some carved line around the area where the vagina would be and the neck. Interesting. It looked like some people thought the neck was reattached. Here we go. Okay, welcome. Yeah, we're still on the first must-know slide of a female figure from Cyclades. So you can catch the part you missed when it's on YouTube Friday, but we're going to wrap this up. We're doing the formal analysis now. Okay, so it has rhythm, of course, the 2 breasts, the 2 arms, the legs. And the carved line is pretty limited, but you do see it, like I said, around the arms, around the vagina and the neck. So there's some carved line. There's no painted line or drawn line, of course. And then it is stable. I don't see much dynamic at all about it. I mean, yeah, maybe the very edges or corners of the shoulders, but even the top of the head is really not. If you look closely, it's almost straight across and flat. So it is mostly stable. No question that. Okay, rhythm, balance. I think we covered everything on this slide. So let's get to the next must know. Now this is a really important slide, and I always give you guys a heads up about which ones are so important that we won't cut them from the study list. Okay, so this is one of those. All right, it's the second one on the list. Okay, this one is Palace Complex at Canosos. Complex, of course, is Complex. Palace, I know everyone knows how to spell that. Complex at, the location is a city in Greece. Canosos, capital K N O S S O S. Crete, the location is Crete, and the date is 1700 BC or BCE. Okay, so what do we see here? We see the entry to the royal palace of, yes, raise your hand. Yes, okay. Sorry.
I just had a question. When
Sure.
these ones that are definitely not being cut, you're saying from an exam, is there some place we can go back and see all of these? I mean, I haven't been taking screenshots, so I'm realizing I've marked all the ones I need to be sure of, but if there's enough of them,
that's the way to do it, is to demark them in your syllabus. And then when you do the review, it's up to you. You want to fast forward on YouTube? It's so easy. I can do it.
Well, my point is, when you present them to us, are you going to tell us what it is, or is it just going to be a picture with no description?
Oh, you mean during the test?
Yes.
Oh, no, I'm not going to tell you what it is. That's up to you to identify. Yeah, I'm not going to say a thing about it because you guys have your notes. You will, I assume, in front of you.
No, I just meant, I didn't mean any of the analysis or anything. I meant if you would just say what that is.
No, you have to identify it. You are responsible for that. Yeah, it's an important point. Yeah. This does require you to, look at your notes and the syllabus and have studied a little bit so that you can, recall the major images. And I can tell you at least 2/3 or more like 3/4 of the slides on the exam, only 8, will be ones that I tell you, like I am now, are too important to cut. So just make extra special careful study of those ones, like this one. Okay, so let's start over about the meaning on what this is. It's the entrance to a royal palace on the island of Crete. Crete was the largest island, that's Crete. Crete was the largest island of the Minoan culture. Now, I meant to hold up something to show you, but it's not that important because it won't affect how you take your notes at all. But I did have a drawing of the island of Santorini that I could have showed you, which you'll see my slides anyway, so you'll get the idea. It's a volcanic ridge. The whole island is one ridge, but Crete is much bigger. Crete has 2 million people. It's one of the largest islands in the Mediterranean, and it was the largest island and the headquarters, you can say, or capital, where the capital was. The royal palace, of course, that is what I'm showing you right there is the entrance to where the king and queen, and I do mean king and queen. We're going to describe what about the Minoans, and I'll spell that word for you because that is important to know. Although you won't get points off if it's any word that's not on the syllabus, you don't get points off for spelling, but it's best to have it right in your notes, of course. Minoan is capital Minoan. Pretty simple. Minoan. Minoan, it's pronounced. Oh, they were remarkable people. When I do my in-person class, I write on the board several things about them, but you can now do that yourself with your notes. There are 3 things about the Minoan culture that make them unique in all of the ancient Western world. You got to always say it that way because other cultures in other parts of the globe had maybe some of these features, but I don't know any other ancient culture, either Western or non-Western, that had all 3 of these attributes. And here they are. This is the most important part of the meaning for this slide. Who were the Minoans? First of all, they had no standing army. They had to have a navy because they were an island culture. They occupied most of the islands that are now part of Greece in the Aegean, right? The majority of them, the largest being Crete. So yes, they had a navy to defend themselves, but they had no standing army, and they never tried to invade any of their neighbors. Well, from all the the lectures we've been doing on ancient cultures, that's very unusual. In the ancient world, almost all these cultures warred with each other, their neighbors, right? Try to conquer them or invade them, subjugate them. So once again, I'll say that the first feature is that they had no standing army, just a navy for defense, and they never tried to attack, let alone invade any other culture. Okay, that'd be enough almost. Number 2 is that they admired and respected animals and did not sacrifice or harm them in their religious ceremonies. I'll say it again. Number 2 feature that makes them unique in the ancient world is the Minoans never, first they respected and admired animals and never sacrificed or harmed any animals in their religious ceremonies. You'll see proof of this as we go through the next few slides. And maybe the most remarkable thing of all is that men and women had equally important roles in their political and religious life. They were jointly ruled by a king and queen. Their whole they lasted about 400 years, this culture. And they had an equal, balanced ruling system where a king and queen jointly ruled. We're not talking about just because she was the wife of the king, she had a little bit of influence. No, we're talking about co-equal rulers throughout their entire history. I'll say it again. Men and women had equal importance in both religious and political life, including the king and queen who were co-rulers. You'll see that with their religious art too. The high priest, equally divided. I don't know exactly half and half, but they were both some female and male high priests who conducted their most important religious ceremonies. Okay, so if you put all 3 of those together, that's pretty remarkable. That's extremely advanced today. We would say, I don't want to say woke. That's too modern a word, but or progressive even. But enlightened is the word I'd use. They were quite enlightened and relatively egalitarian. For instance, with animals, they believed animals had souls. Well, I don't know if any of you are not animal lovers where that makes sense, but it does to me. In any case, they felt that. Now, does that mean they never? No, they had to fish. These islands are not the best farming islands. If you've ever seen, film or documentaries, let alone been to the Greek islands, some of them don't even have water or very little water. So yeah, they had to fish and do some minor hunting. But what they didn't do was abuse animals and sacrifice them in their religious ceremonies like every other ancient culture, all the way through the Romans did that. They didn't. And I'll show you the evidence of that. And then the fact that men and women had almost equal did have equal importance in their political life and religious life is unheard of in the ancient world. So here we have the entrance. This is where you go to see the king and queen, and maybe one or the other, but usually both. if you had something you needed to ask for the world, the rulers to deal with. But what have we got here? Anybody guess what those are symbolic of? I'll give you a clue. It has to do with one of the animals they considered sacred. They had in their religious ceremonies. You'll see in one of the
Ox or a bull or something.
yeah, bull horns. Yes, they were. It's a modern. Doesn't that look modern? Like late 20th century abstract, like a Picasso piece or something. And he did that. In fact, he said he was inspired by the Minoans. So I'll say again what that is. One of the next facts you should have about the meaning of this slide. That this is typical of their public spaces. That they had images of some or parts of the animals they considered sacred, and there were 3 that they considered sacred.
It honestly, in my opinion, it looks a lot like the Egyptian depiction of the horns that we
Yeah,
saw.
it does a bit. That's true. It does, doesn't it? Yeah, I thought that's interesting. No one else has said that before. I see your point,
Hey,
but they definitely were thinking.
I think it's kind of odd. I think it's I'm looking past those to the left though. Isn't it odd that both those columns are like so radically different?
Yes, we're going to talk about briefly. It's not a major fact, but it is an important, an interesting detail. But let's just finish up about their sacred animals. They believe that dolphins, snakes, and bulls were their 3 holiest animals, or most sacred, I should say. Most sacred. You can say holy if you want, but I think the right word is sacred. They worshiped them, and they had a role, or you could say use them, but that sounds negative. They had a place for them, however you want to say that, in their religious ceremonies. But you're going to see the proof. They did not harm them at all. They thought they were sacred animals. They admired them. Okay, so yeah, let's talk about the entrance. This is a Minoan style column. They were round and they got wider as you go to the top. You're going to see some close-ups. I actually have slides I bought there because the ones I took somehow, the sand got in my camera and they didn't come out. This is a commercial slide I bought. And these are the stairs leading up to the entrance plaza, or the entry plaza. And you would have religious or political ceremonies, or maybe even the king and queen would come out to make a statement in this plaza where the horns are in the sculpture. Yeah, and the fact that one of these columns is square and one is round is just something odd about the Minoans. In essence, were playing around with their own style. They created this style column. It's very different than Greek and Roman columns. If it's not obvious to you how, it will be by the time next week when we get to Greek architecture. These are not these tall, narrow columns with fluting, and carved leaves at the top. These are very functional columns. You see that? Very practical. And they just chose to, for whatever reason, to make one square on the entrance. Most of the time they were round, but here they chose one square and one round. So that's what this is. This is an entrance to a royal palace complex. And we're going to see the inside of the complex in the next several slides. But let's wrap this up with the formal analysis. Okay, so the largest mass, I would say it's a staircase, but it's hard to tell because of the angle of the photo, but I'm pretty sure it's bigger than what, at least in the photo, we can only see one end of the entrance. So then what about space? Well, the second largest mass would be the entrance, and then the bullhorn sculpture, right? In that order. This is a long, narrow passageway with about a 15-foot high ceiling. I've walked through there to get into the you can walk around in this complex. Well, you used to be able to. I assume you still can. And so that's it. It's a real space. There's no techniques for space. The colors cool on the stairs and the sculpture and the columns, white paint. The walls and the ceiling of the actual structure are warm, of course. The textures, real rough texture of rock, real rough texture of stone. And yes, this is brick here. And then real smooth, painted, of course, real smooth wood textures. Those are real textures. I don't know if you want to call that simulated, like a bone of a, the actual, of course, a horn of, obviously, of a bull is. Well, actually, someone told me that's not bone, it's hair. I don't know. I thought it's bone. I'm pretty sure that with a bull, the horns are bone. Anyway, that you could say is simulated texture if you felt like it, because it's been sanded smooth. Everything else is a real rough textures, except the columns are real smooth. Colors, I already said, yeah, right, covered that. Sorry, modeling, there's no techniques for modeling. In most buildings there aren't. There is only the shadow created by the sun, so there's natural modeling. Here there is painted line on the columns. You can see it right at the tops of the columns. Everything else, though, is the edges where the sun creates shadows. That's always called, remember with architecture, it's mostly visual lines you see around the edges of the building and the sculpture. The largest mass, I think I covered that. Let's see, balance, yes. If you were to stand in front of this, it's totally symmetrical. You know, the bullhorn sculpture is right in the middle of this plaza. The entrance is, you know, definitely symmetrical. And the stairs leading up to it would be. So it may not look symmetrical from here, but it is. The rhythm is obvious with the stairs, the two bullhorns, even though the columns aren't the same shape, they have roughly the same, well, certainly the same height. And then the walls have the patterns, the stones patterns on them. So there's a lot of rhythm. It's almost entirely stable, except for the round column and I guess the bullhorns. The other column, the whole rest of it, it's all right angles. So that's all stable. Okay, I think I covered everything there, right? I don't believe I forgot anything. So now I'm going to enlarge this because this is from the slide library. The one I had of this for some reason didn't, I bought there somehow, didn't survive the transition into the file, the digital file that the slide librarian graciously did for me of my own slides of this place. Okay, but this is where the king and queen could come out because that area we saw would be over here. They could come out here, and I'm sure there were stairs leading up to this balcony and address the people. You know, if they had an important announcement, or they could have a high priest come out and, you know, if it was a holiday, a religious ceremony, of course, it would have been probably a priest that would have talked to the crowds below. You'll have to take notes on these. These are just. So now let's go to what the palace looks like. These are, I love these slides. This place just sends shivers down my spine because it's so different than any other ancient culture. Well, we already talked about, right? You now all have in your notes the three things that mark the Minoans as unique culturally, but architecturally or visually, artistically, if you want to say artistically and architecturally, they were also unique. See, look at their columns. They're not like Greek and Roman columns. They get wider at the top. That's right there a little lot. And then they have these, some people say cushions. I've heard students write it that way if they're writing about this for on the test or maybe on a paper. Yeah, it is kind of unusual. Those are the tops of a column are called capitals, the capitals. You don't really have to know that word for the exam, but it's going to come up on the Greek and Roman architecture slide. So you probably should write that in your notes. The top or decorative part of a column is the capital. They had the simplest or plainest kind of capital of any ancient culture. They were trying to be functional. I'm not sure why the columns get wider at the top. You don't even have to go into that in your notes. There must be a strategic or logistical reason for that. But let's walk around. See, look at the colors too. Rich, deep reds. Two more slides before we get to the next must know. So now let's walk around behind the columns and we see what's in the throne room. This is the king's throne room. Does anybody know what these kind of creatures are called? I think some of you do. They're
Griffin.
Yeah, say again.
Griffin.
Yeah, excellent. Yes, Griffin. Yeah, they have that strange bird-like head and a cat-like, or some say lion-like body.
That's pretty impressive painting right there.
Isn't that amazing for
Yeah.
4,000 years ago? Yeah. I just love this culture. That's why just say many historians believe the Minoans were the inspiration for the legend of Atlantis. And I'll let you decide if you think that makes sense when you see my own slides of the main island that legend may have been based on, which will be at the end when I say I'll tell you. You can put your notes away and just listen. Okay.
Honestly, this bit here is way more impressive than that slide that we have to remember if you're asking me.
You mean the detail here? Yeah,
just that entire room is to me far more interesting.
Yeah, I know. I thought about
ruined throne room.
Yeah, well, then you get into the issue of who gets, if either the king or the queen's throne room should get more attention. This is heavily restored, but we know that it had these frescoes on it because there's enough left. It was buried. This whole site was just buried for thousands of years. Probably, yes, we know why. Actually, this part of the meaning I meant to say at the start of the first must-know slide of the palace complex for the Minoans. This is what happened to them. They were the most prosperous culture in the Eastern Mediterranean, probably in all of the Mediterranean at that time. They didn't have any poverty, right? They never had wars. they had plenty of food, you know, and they had egalitarian treatment of right men and women. We covered some of that. How and why did they disappear? Literally within a few decades, they disappear because of, anybody guess why?
The Trojan War.
It's not a bad guess. Now this is well before that. Not long, actually. You know what? Not too. It's about 200 years before.
Some kind of a plague.
Natural disasters.
Natural disaster. That's it. It was a series of volcanic eruptions, which completely destroyed each of those islands, or the few that it didn't destroy, left them isolated with no, communication with the bigger islands. And like you said, some of them didn't even have water, some of the smaller islands. So they literally were wiped out by nature. Yeah, natural, a series of volcanic eruptions and earthquakes, of course, that would have accompanied that, wiped them out about 1300 BC. And the Trojan War, by the way, the person that spoke up, you're close, is about 100 years later. We'll talk about that next week. So they disappeared just before the rise of the Greek city-states happened. Very similar. They actually traded with some of the very early Greek city-states. Anyway, they were wiped out by natural disaster. You can keep it simple. Okay, so this is not a must-know, but now I want to show you that's another view of the king's throne room. But now here's a close-up of one of the griffins. Isn't that nice? And these are bulrushes. Well, actually, that's not the right word. They grow along the bay. We have the same climate, right? All through California, from San Diego up through at least Mendocino County, you see the same kind of tidal pools with the same kind of plant life. Not the same, maybe bird species. I can't remember what these are called, but you see them along the edges of the San Francisco Bay. But they're classic Mediterranean. And then here is the Queen's throne room. Look at that. You see how they worship dolphins? They show them with an intelligent expression, almost, kind of, or countenance, if you want to say face, features, however you want to say that. Okay, and here's the Queen's throne room. That was her throne. That was what we are looking at just a moment ago. But the last thing I'll say before we get to the must know is look at the ceiling. Go ahead. Sorry.
What island was this on?
Crete. Yeah, Crete, the largest of all the Greek islands. And it was the largest and therefore main island of the Minoan culture too. Okay, so I'll just finish up with this. This room was about 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Of course, cooler. It was always over 100. It's easily 105, more like 110. In fact, parts of the time I was in Greece, it was 115 degrees, and there was a lot of shade. There's no shade around here, no trees. So it was a welcome relief to walk into the Queen's throne room and feel about 20 degrees cooler. Can anybody guess why? There's two reasons. You don't have to write this. Because of the ventilation system. Just, you don't have to write that, but if you want to, you could, as part of the meaning of who the Minoans were. So we'll wrap this up quickly, and I'll just say, look how high the openings are to let air flow through. But this is a louvered ceiling. I mean, that, like, you don't see that except on 1950s apartment building bathroom windows. Pardon me.
So for what was
Isn't that
for what-
interesting? Louvered ceiling like that would bring the air, because heat rises, we know that, and it would conduct the heat. It's hard to explain. I'm not an engineer. I just know the tour guides explained it very well, and I researched it later.
it's curious because back in my house in Mexico and older house, the
Yes.
ceiling is that.
Oh, they do. And does it help
Yeah.
cool off the interior?
Yeah. Well, I don't know this for cooling, but that's the
I'll bet it does, though. It makes sense. Yeah. Because, of course, what part of Mexico were you?
From Jalisco, but we used to live in a casona, old house. Like
And what
all the-
city?
I think
Yeah.
I think I can see how that would work. It's basically there's a very narrow high portion in the center of the ceiling, and I think all the hot air would just collect in there. You know what I mean? It has a higher point
Yes.
instead of having the
Yes.
ceiling lower.
That you're right. Actually, I forgot about that because I haven't shown that. I mean, I haven't got a slide of that, and I haven't been here since, good God, in the 80s was when I was in Greece last. There is an opening in the ceiling, but the air circulates both over across the ceiling and I guess up into above the ceiling, and then it also here circulates here. Oh, someone had a question here. It looks like. Sorry, I was just saying. Is there a chat question? Okay, no, there isn't right now. All right, let's move on to the next must know, and I kind of want to get rid of that temporarily. All right, let's get to this one, which I forgot there's another view here. Just a dig. Boy, my slide librarian really went to town. I'm glad she did with all the different angles, but you don't need to know these, but this one you do. This is a must know, and I'm not cutting it from the slide. The study list, this one. Okay, it's snake goddess. Snake goddess, Goddess, just like the first word sounds. 2 words, of course. Snake goddess. Crete, the location again, and the date 1600 or 1600 BCE. So what are we looking at here? We are looking at a high priestess. In other words, a female priest who is conducting one of their most important religious ceremonies. I'll say again, this is a female priest who is conducting one of the most important religious ceremonies of the Minoans. Or there's another theory, which I don't agree with. It's just a decorative figurine, right? It's about 18 inches tall. That might be used in some people's houses, because it might be reminding them of a female deity who liked to play with snakes. The evidence is overwhelming that it's not correct. I think Stockstead's text may say that, but having been there and been to the museum where this is, and talking to I have many friends from Greece who are professors or historians or writers, the most likely explanation is that this is an actual human female priest or priestess, high priest, you should say it that way. That's an important distinction at the top of the priest chain, right? And she's conducting a religious ceremony called the snake ceremony, which we know they had in their religious ceremonial life, which she is, as yes, it looks like she is holding 2 snakes, and yes, they were poisonous, and I don't know if they were depoisoned or whatever the word is, the poison was removed or not, but either way, they can still bite you. So yes, it's risky. And then what is that on top of her head? Anybody want to guess? Some kind of animal.
Owl.
An owl's not a bad guess, but
Looks like a rabbit.
I think it's more likely
A cat?
Yeah, I think it's a cat. That's what I see anyway, right? Yeah. Hawk, somebody said. Okay. We don't know, but cats, of course, were sacred, or almost sacred. They were important images to Egyptians and sometimes depicted in their religious art. You know that, right? So we don't know, but it looks like a very nervous cat to me on top of her leather headdress. That's no question that's what their male and female priests wore during religious ceremonies. And then, yes, the female priests would have, because it was a ceremony for human fertility, their breasts would be exposed, and they would wear a jacket like this with a leather apron, which, if they had to, and sometimes they did, lower their arms, the snakes could bite all they want and they wouldn't get through. So it would protect them. The point is, we don't have to guess about those facts. All of the ancient Middle Eastern cultures up through the early Greeks, at least the Minoans certainly, and the Babylonians and the Assyrians, and to some degree the Egyptians, had similar outfits for their male and female priests. And of course, in the other cultures, they're almost all male priests. High priests were, anyway. The lower ranking priests might have been female. Here, they, like I just said, they had equal importance, male and female. So equally important roles for high priestess and high priest, conducting religious ceremonies in front of a room full of worshipers. And this was one of their sacred animals. We already mentioned that. So if you didn't write it before, you should now. The snakes were considered sacred. And this kind of pleated skirt, we know they wore things like that because it's in their artwork all over the frescoes of their buildings. So it just makes sense that this was an actual image of a female, and maybe not a portrait of an individual female high priestess. But the fact that the other possibility that it's an image of a minor goddess begs the question, why then the human features, and we know that humans did these exact ceremonies with just the exact same outfits. It's probably an actual priestess. Okay, so that's the main part of the meaning. You already know who the Minoans are, so if it's on the exam, of course, you could describe the unique three features I already gave you about them that distinguishes the Minoans from the other ancient cultures, European or Western culture. Okay, let's do a formal analysis. Of course, it's an intact human figure, so it's balanced left to right. And if you draw the line here, roughly, across the middle of the apron, I would say it's balanced top to bottom, roughly again, of course. Obviously, it's got the rhythm of the pleats in the skirt, the decorative patterns on the apron, the arms, the eyes, the two snakes. And then there is both carved and painted line here. Let's go up and see her face. See, look at that. She's in a trance and she's getting her worshippers in the room with her into a trance. That was the purpose of this. And by the way, yes, they might have drunk certain libations to get into the frame of mind. In other words, to become courageous enough not to worry about getting bitten by these snakes during the ceremony. But perhaps it was just a natural trance. In any case, she's clearly got a trance-like state in her eyes. And then we see painted and carved line on her face and on her hands, and I would say less so, yeah, on her jacket too, yeah, and her headdress. Okay, and it's painted on, obviously alternating warm and cool colors on her dress and on her jacket. Now her skin tones are white, but that doesn't mean she looked that way. We covered this with the Egyptian slides, but if you didn't see that, definitely you want to watch that lecture from last week. And then in almost every ancient culture in their art, up through the Greeks, women were depicted in the same image with men as having a lighter skin tone, usually white, regardless of the fact that they wouldn't have had, most of them. Maybe the Greeks women would have, but most of the other ancient Middle Eastern cultures were people of color, of course. So they would have had darker skin tones, men and women. But the women were portrayed just as a technique to differentiate female figures from male figures. There wasn't any kind of social commentary or anything like that. Okay, so we know that the white paint on there is probably just that, almost certainly an indication of this being a female, if it wasn't already obvious from her physique. And then we have, it's dynamic and stable. Her arms are out stable, her head is upright, her waist is, I'd say all the way through till you get to the skirt itself, and that flares out, of course, and then you have the breast and the headdress. So it's a mixture of dynamic and stable lines. If you want to break it down into space masses, you could say she's the largest mass. Then it's a close call between, I guess, her headdress and then maybe the cat, if that's what it is, or the snakes. It's hard to say, so you could decide. But you could also say it's really all one mass. Now for space, it's a real object. It's about 18 inches tall. And there is overlapping, of course, of her arms and hands over the snakes, her clothing over her body, the headdress over her head. Let's see, am I forgetting anything? Warm color. Modeling, oh yes, and texture, very realistic. The modeling here would be no, there's no technique for modeling. I'm sorry. Again, if three-dimensional object is sculpture or building is not going to have technique for modeling. It's the shadows in museums, lights. But there is similar texture, superb on the leather apron, on the cloth skirt, on the leather jacket, on her skin, her headdress, even on the snakes. Okay, this is another one that's really important. So I should try to limit it to no more than 3 a night where I say that, though with the Egyptian slides, I had more than that. This one is bull jumping fresco from Canosos. Bull jumping fresco. And of course, you remember that's Fresco from Canosos, Knossos. Location is Crete, again, the island. And the date is 1500 or 1500 BC. Here is proof of 2 things I told you earlier about the Minoans that mark them as unique in the ancient world. First, they aren't harming the bull. This is not a bullfighting thing. I've had some people write that or say it or assume that. And some tourists, when they went to this museum, I heard one of them guided, I think it was British group or something, where the tour guide had to correct people. No, it's not a bullfighting fresco. They're not fighting the bull. They are flipping themselves at great danger to themselves over the back of the bull. See, here's a female priest or priestess. Here's a male priest with a darker skin tone. You see the point about male and female coloration that I've been making for the last 3 weeks. You see it there, right? And here's a female who's going to catch the male. Now, the 2 females appear to be taller and therefore probably heavier than the small, relatively svelte or thin or whatever you want to say, slight male figure. Well, that makes sense because they have to catch him. When he flips himself over, that's what she's doing. She's about to catch him. And then, of course, he or the other female would have to catch themselves, or each other, I should say, rather. They would have to take turns, in other words. All they did was grab, in terms of how the bull was used here, grab the bull's horns as it charges them. And I don't know how they did this, but what would have been something to watch, right? Flip themselves like acrobats over the back of the bull and be caught by a fellow priest or priestess. Okay, looks like we might have one chat here. Uh-oh. Can you guys hear me now?
I can know, but for a moment, I
Okay,
was like
what
logged
did you
out and
miss?
then,
Thank you for doing that. Did you miss what I was saying about the male and
Yeah.
female figures?
just like 1 or 2 minutes.
Yeah, okay. Well, then I'll repeat the part about the color of the skin on the two figures on either end is a white skin tone, which isn't realistic. Remember, that indicates or symbolizes they're being female. So they were high priestesses conducting a ceremony that did not harm the bull. I was just finishing that part right before you guys signed back on, I guess, or the connection came back, which is that they grabbed the horns of the bull, right, and flipped themselves over the back. And then one of the other priests or priestesses behind the bull will catch them over and over and never harm the bull. No blood is drawn. Bulls were sacred animals to them. Like I said, they did not harm, let alone sacrifice animals in their religious ceremonies. And here's the proof of that. Okay, it's pretty remarkable, isn't it, that they would risk their lives, because easily they could have been the ones harmed. Obviously, the bull's charging at you, and it's much heavier than any human being. So it's a rather remarkable religious ceremony, and it's evidence of the egalitarianism or equality between men and women in their religious ceremonies, and of their not ever harming animals, at least the sacred ones that they worshiped in their religious ceremonies, all of which is similar. And it's a fresco from the palace wall of the palace at Canosos. It was once on the wall of that palace complex. So that's the last part of the meeting. If you're curious, these are the parts that are original. The lighter parts are filled in later by a restoration artist. So would we know what they look like? Because they have so many images, some of them are intact, left over in other parts of the Greek islands from the Minoans. They had, and each island had some kind of local ruler, right? Like a governor who had his own palace, or hers, I should say, theirs. Male and female jointly would have ruled even at the local level. And we've seen the frescoes are all over the Greek islands. Yes, Rob.
I have a question about the fresco. I mean, the definition is a painting on wet plaster, right?
Exactly.
So how do we know that the plaster is actually wet when they painted it?
Because you can do it now, and because we have written records from as far back as Roman or even Greek artists.
I was just curious. Because it's like, that could have been dried for a week by the time they painted on it, for all we know.
Well, no, because
It
then
sticks better when it's wet, right?
Well, that'd be defeating the purpose of a fresco.
Right.
So we'll keep that brief, but I'll just say the purpose of a fresco is to lock the colors of the paint into the plaster so it's more well preserved and lasts longer. Of course, some plaster fades or deteriorates faster than other plaster.
I understand.
Okay, so let's do the formal analysis, and then I'm going to give you guys a choice. We could just not take a break if you want to do the next two slides, are not as long as the last few, and see the 15 or 20 minutes of my own slides of Atlantis and end early. If you want to do that, we could do that.
I vote for that.
Anybody object? Yeah. Then you get off a little extra early tonight and do whatever you need. Okay, we'll go ahead and do it that way. So to wrap up this one, it's balanced. Obviously, you've got one of the three acrobats, the male one in the darker skin tones, in the middle, the bull across the middle, and one each of the two tall, very tall females, are probably 6 feet tall, because they had to be larger than the average female to catch this guy as he comes vaulting off the back of the bull there. It's dynamic. There's not really much. Maybe you could say she is standing upright. That's true. This woman is got a little bit more of a dynamic legs and arms to her body. But even here, the one at the far right is still got. So it's mostly dynamic with bold outlines. You can see that around the bull, especially, but also I would say around the human figures too. Mostly bold outline, bold not bull. Sorry, the simian texture is realistic on the horns and the hair of the bull and the hairs of the humans. Otherwise, on the skin of the bodies of the three humans, there is no simian texture, and there's very little modeling. The only modeling is maybe on the bull's head. It's really all I see. A little bit maybe in the horn, I guess. Well, that's part of its head. And we have the largest mass. That's easy. The bull, and then the two female priests or priestesses, and then the slightly shorter male priest in the middle. There's only overlapping for space, of course. And then we have the rhythm of the legs, and of course, hair of the bull, and the arms, hands, feet, and legs of the three priests. And then I think I already said the colors are cool on the two females. I didn't really finish that, right? Warm on the male priest and warm on the bull. If it was originally intact, when it was originally, it would all be filled in. The color here would be clearly a deep kind of orangish brown color on the bull's hair, and that's all warm, of course. Let's see, am I forgetting anything? Modeling texture, I think we covered it. Yes, okay. All right, so let's go to the next two must-knows. These are my own slides for just a minute. This is where the Trojan War began. And it's really one, I used to say wars. It was one war that lasted 10 years, right? Okay, so this is that's the Aegean Sea out there. It was a bit overcast that day. It's like 15 miles from the sea. It's called the city of Mycenae. So the next must-know, I'll go ahead and give you the title as we work up to it, is second from the last one, Lioness with two S's, you know, Lioness Gate at Mycenae is Mycenae, Mycenae, Greece, and the date is 1250 BC or BCE. So this was the largest, and you could say wealthiest or most powerful, either way. Back then it meant the same thing. So the largest and wealthiest or most powerful of all the early Greek city-states. Athens was a small village back then. So Mycenae was the most powerful Greek city-state, and that's where the Trojan War began, in the gates of this city. Here's the slide itself, the must-know. Here are the two lionesses flanking. Look at this, a Minoan column. You know that proves that they traded with the Minoans. Well, we know they did because there's some records from that period. At least a few that, and they brought back some of the finished goods. The Minoans were obviously very skilled craftspersons. And so they traded peacefully with the Minoans because the Minoans didn't present a threat, and they were so wealthy and skilled and prosperous that everybody wanted to trade with them. You know, I didn't say this before, but what parallel can anybody make with a modern nation in the middle of a continent where there have been wars for centuries with each other, but this one country in the middle of Europe has never, almost never, been invaded. Well, once it was, but hundreds of years ago. Switzerland. Yeah, that's the only thing that doesn't fit is they didn't even allow women the right to vote until the 1970s. That late. That they're behind the curve on, but Switzerland does have that, you know, no standing army, you know, well, they do have a navy, but just on the rivers and their lakes. And they've never invaded anybody else, and they're very prosperous and they get along with their neighbors. Napoleon did actually invade them. That's the exception, but even Hitler didn't try to. Okay, back to this. The meaning of this is that these two lions, remember, lions are symbolic. I think I've said this before, in all the ancient cultures, all the way through the ancient Romans, of guarding or guardians. They are guardians of whatever city gate. In this case, the gate is missing, of course, but this is a 12-foot high entrance with, does this look familiar? It should to many of you, right? Stonehenge, right? With the monoliths and lintel. It's the same exact method of construction used as part of the wall of the most powerful city in the early Greek city-state era. This is when Greece was not yet unified as a culture. Of course, it wasn't for most of its ancient time. That briefly it was unified under Athens, right? When they fought the Persians, they unified together. But here they were a bunch of separate city-states, often warring with each other, until Helen, who shouldn't be called Helen of Troy, she should be called Helen of Mycenae, because she was married to the king's brother. That would make her his sister-in-law, right? Helen of Troy, that's how she's called, so we'll just use that, was Some say she eloped with the Prince of Troy. All we know is that there was a party, yes, a big banquet is the right word, in the walls, inside the walls of this city, Mycenae, between the Trojans who were visiting, their higher ranking officials and some of their soldiers. And one of them, the prince, right, future ruler of Troy, either he fell in love with or both mutually with each other, and he and Helen of Troy disappeared in the middle of the night, and it was gone in the morning. That's how the Trojan War started. So if you've heard that phrase, she was a woman who could launch 1,000 ships, or her face could launch 1,000 ships. That's kind of silly, but what they're implying is that is what the starting point of and it was a real war. We know it wasn't a myth. Now they found the site where Troy was, which is on the coast of Turkey, by the way. So that war and all the myths that came out of it, which we'll talk about next week with the Greek slides.
Like the pinnacle of toxic masculinity.
Say again. Sorry.
That's the pinnacle of toxic masculinity.
Yes, you could say that. That's not a bad way to put it. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So what you have here is a keystone. That's the right word for this triangular piece of stone that helps hold the other stones in place. This is all part of the meaning now. The walls of this city, why no one ever conquered it. Troy, yes, we know how that happened with the Trojan horse, but don't mix the two cities up. These, 500 miles apart. This is in the inland of Greece, on the mainland, I should say, of Greece, not on the coast. And so the walls were 25 feet high. They are still 22 feet high. They're only missing, I think I showed you, right? With the top 3 feet of stones are missing. Look how well fit, and they haven't had to be reassembled or restored. Pretty amazing because they were so well built. It's called fitted, it's Fitted stonework. Fitted stonework is a very of highly developed skill of stonemasons, and the only other place I can think of that you can see it in this hemisphere is Machu Picchu in Peru, and we are going to talk about those cultures later on a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit. And of course, there are walls in other parts of the world, which have this same. But this is one of the oldest walled cities where the stones are still in place from the original construction. The gate is missing, and of course, the top 3 feet or several feet is missing. Otherwise, it's held up pretty well for. Let's see now. What 3,200 plus years. Okay, that's the whole meaning here. It's balanced. Yeah, of course, the two lions are exactly equal, flanking a column in the middle. And remember, it's a Minoan style column, so that is clearly evidence of their trading with the Minoans. We just saw those at the palace complex. The rhythm is very obvious with the repeated shapes of the stones, the two monoliths here, the two lions. It's mostly stable. The stones themselves and the whole entryway here, the gateway, that's all stable. The lions are somewhat dynamic because of the angle of their bodies, but otherwise it's mostly stable. And then there's carved line on the keystone. The rest of the line is just visual, right? And that, of course, is from the shadows of the sun. That's just the only modeling is the natural modeling from the sunlight, by the way. The color is cool gray. There's no other color here. Then we have the real rough texture of stone and simulated textures on the lion's body and the bodies and the column. That's the only simulated texture. The largest mass, I'd say it's a lintel. Pretty obvious. That's the biggest piece of stone. Then the two monoliths, and then the keystone. For space, it's a real opening of about 12 feet high in the middle of a wall that once was 25 feet high and is now more like about 22 feet. So it's all real space. You could say there's overlapping, but I don't really even see that here with the lion's bodies. They don't overlap. Maybe their legs overlap each other. And let's see, are we missing anything? Modeling, texture, balance. Yes, I think I said that, roughly balanced. Okay, let's do one more and then we're gonna end a little after 8. This is the Beehive Tomb. Beehive Tomb. That's Tomb. Beehive Tomb at Mycenae, and I'll spell that again for you. It's the same. It's just outside the walls of that same city. Of course, capital Mycenae. Location is Greece again, and it's 1300 BC. So Mycenae was around for a couple hundred years before they built those walls. And so when the walls were built, by that time, I already said this with the last slide, and this is the last must-know slide for tonight. It had, by the time the Lioness Gate was built, become the most powerful, wealthiest city in the early Greek city-state era. It's so far back that most of the history we have is myths and oral legends. We have some written records. It's not prehistoric, but it's so early we don't have a lot of written records. Whereas from ancient Athens, Sparta, all those other city-states, hundreds of years later, yes, we have written records from that era. So this is the early Greek city-state era. You could say archaic is the other word. That sounds funny for some of you if you know the other meaning of archaic. If you want to write that, it's A-R-C-H-I-A-I-C, sorry. A-R-C-H-A-I-C. Archaic means the earliest and least developed phase of a culture. So archaic Greek history is this period we're talking about. Before they built the city walls, they buried their kings, their deceased kings, in beehive-shaped tombs. I think I have another view. Yeah, look, this is looking straight up to the top of it. It's shaped just like a beehive. In other words, that's why we call them that. And this doorway is less than 6 feet. I had to duck to get in here. I've been inside this place. Don't go in when a bunch of French teenagers are there all yelling at the same time. Split your eardrums. Unfortunately, it was a field trip of French tourist school bus kids. And anyway, so you see these stones again, the fitted stone I was talking about. That's part of the meaning of this slide. So you could add that if you hadn't already written that for both of this slide and the previous one. The stone is so well fitted that it holds together without mortar. I don't know if I said that in the last slide. It doesn't need mortar. And it's now here it's buried though in the side of a mountain. So some would say, oh, well, that's why it's held together. Well, you know what? If the stone wasn't held in place securely by the carving, the shaping of it, the placing of it, that's called fitted stone, it would have collapsed from the weight of the earth around it. So that doesn't detract from the unique quality of the skill of the craftsman here. So it's buried in the side of a mountain, and then they would have carried the body. Yes, they think they were mummified, but the bodies are long gone of their kings into each had their own beehive tomb. In the middle, they placed the body, you know, perhaps in a coffin. I'm not sure, but it definitely the remains of the king and all their worldly belongings inside, and then sealed the tomb, and also had booby traps in the tunnel leading to it. That should sound familiar. Anybody think of another culture where they did that? We just covered.
Egypt.
Yeah, the Egyptians. They were trading with the ancient Egyptians, so they had learned something about funerary techniques from the Egyptians. So they were emulating the ancient Egyptians at this point in their history. Later on, they cremated their dead. Within a few hundred years, they would have not done this. Although sometimes they did. The Romans, they did both. They buried some of their rulers and others they cremated. But here they would have buried the remains with their worldly belongings. And that's very similar, again, to the Egyptians because they were influenced by them due to their trade with ancient Egypt. Okay, that's the whole meaning of this. Formal analysis. Well, it might look like this is yellow stone, and in point of fact, it is. It's a warm colored stone. It's discolored from minerals in the earth and the seepage of water, minerals in the water and the earth that surround this. Because like I said, it's buried several, I don't know, it's a couple hundred feet below ground. You have to walk into the tunnel here to get into the door entryway. So that's discoloration from chemical impurities in the earth around it. But otherwise, the original color was warm yellow stone. And of course, the texture is a real rough texture of stone. And we have the rhythm of each stone. Of course, that's pretty much all the rhythm there is. It's both stable and dynamic, because if you look up, I'll give you the space dimension in a minute. It gets narrow as you go. But each of these, circles or rows, rather, stone forms a circle, and then it curves upward like a beehive into a cap, a rounded cap. So individually, the stones are stable. The walls themselves are dynamic. For space, it's real space, and that is 22 foot high, an open cone-like or conical, rather is a better word, conical shaped room with a 22 foot high ceiling. That's literally the real space. There is no techniques for space, and there's no modeling. Of course, it was underground, so only time you'd see shadows is someone brought a torch in to, look at the king's body or try to steal their worldly goods. So there was never any modeling here. The line is visual line between the rocks, so there's no painted or carved line between each stone. And then let's see, balanced. Yes, it was completely symmetrical, left to right. Wherever you divide it, top to bottom, it was weighted toward the bottom, or unbalanced, because it gets wider, obviously, as a cone or beehive shape would do. And then we have, let's see, what am I forgetting? Balance, modeling. I know I'm forgetting one of the elements. Let's see. Oh, mass. It's just a single mass. There really isn't any, I don't say, unless you want to break down each stone. It's a large, one single large mass. Okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pull up my slides of Atlantis, and you guys can ask questions while I'm doing this. It takes me about 2 minutes to do this, which will be anything you want to ask about the slides we just covered, okay? Or anything about, by the way, I misspoke about the midterm. We actually don't have to review next week. We're focusing on Greek art and then Roman art. So it's the midterm isn't until October. Let me just give you, it's on the syllabus, of course, right? October 18th. Okay, so you have some major time before that, okay? All right, so, whoops, that's not the one I want. It's all right, it'll take just a minute. So I'm gonna show you the slides of ancient Greece, here we go. I just wanna make sure because I have more than one selection. This should be it. Yes, this is it. This is what I wanna show you. I'm going to show you 3 or 4 Greek islands. Okay, but first we need to pull up the window for screen share again. Okay, that should work. It has before, so let's hope that it does again. Okay, can people see this? You guys, can you see? Yes. Okay, this is one of those Greek islands. I'll keep this to just because I want to get to the main point, which is really incredible views of the volcanic island called Santorini, which many historians think is the basis for the legend of Atlantis, the lost continent, so-called, of Atlantis. Okay, but this is not part of that legend. It was probably a Minoan outpost because almost all the islands in the Eastern Mediterranean, the Aegean, right, were part of the Minoan culture, and it's quite well populated. So now we can go up closer. When you take a ferry from Athens, well, actually you can't take it from Athens, the port of Athens, which is about 20 miles south of there, across the Aegean, you can't get in one day to either Crete, the largest island, or Santorini, because they stop at all these islands, because if they didn't, these people wouldn't get water. This island doesn't have any water, so it has to depend on imported water and even some food. It's a pretty impressive island. I liked it a lot. And the Turks ruled here. There's one of their old mosques on the hill up above. For hundreds of years, yeah, the Turks took over almost all of Southern Europe for centuries, including all of what's now Greece. But they still allowed the Greeks, well, some say allowed, some say not. See, there's the mosque up there, to have their own Christian churches. But this is their town hall, like City Hall, we call it today. And you see, it's a very popular tourist spot. You know, people rent boats. Many people from Europe own, or rent apartments and own boats that they keep there, in the summer or whenever the weather's good or their vacation time is. But now we're going to go to that island I've been talking about, Santorini, Santorini. I think I have it right. Santorini. Yeah, I do. I meant to hold up the name of it. I should have done that. And at the end, I will, for those who care to know. If you get to Greece and you have time to take a ferry and you only have time to go to 1 or 2 islands, I would definitely make Santorini the top of your list. I've never been to a more beautiful place. We arrived, obviously it was, sunset. The sun was setting. And maybe that wasn't the best time to arrive because then you have to scramble around to find a place to stay. But at least when I was there, now it was a long time ago, I have to admit, there were plenty of small little pensiones where they were just the owners of these apartments. See, this is what the city looked like at night. would welcome you in and give you a full breakfast, and if you wanted dinner, if you ordered it, we preferred to eat somewhere else. And this older Greek couple took us in, and they just treated us like we were their own kids. It was really nice. Whoops, that's what I meant to say, is that's the view from outside the door of where we stayed. On the edge of the only, well, there's actually two cities on that island. This is Thera, Thra, which is was, they think, the main city when it was under Minoan rule. And I'll show you a little bit of evidence, if not proof, that this was one of the most prosperous of all the Minoan islands here. But the island has volcanic rock. Everywhere you look, you see that there. That's from stones from the island itself right there, because you'll see the evidence of how it's literally the whole island is the lip of a volcano. And that's only clear when you get to the highest point and look down and see the whole island, which you'll see in the next several slides. So we were just walking into town because these are too deep. We didn't have a rental car anyway, even if we wanted to. And I'd prefer walking because it wasn't that far. You do have to take plenty of water, shade, and sunscreens. You know, I think we had even not umbrellas, parasols, they called them, the Brits called them. It's hot there, and you see there are no trees and no shade. Okay, we're getting close to the center of town, and you can see that these narrow walkways are, well, you can't tell by looking maybe, but they're hundreds of years old. But Thera, the town, the main town, is somewhere around 1,000 years old, because the island was totally wiped out of human habitation, was wiped off the island when the volcanic eruption first, the big one, occurred. And then it was repopulated slowly during the Middle Ages. And I call it the island of melting ice cream, by the way. That's my phrase for this. And the reason for that is, look at this. Look at the architecture. Anybody been to New Mexico or seen Georgia O'Keeffe paintings of New Mexico? Because she lived there for a long time, last 30 years of her life. After painting all the flowers first, right? Then she painted skulls and mountains and adobe missions in New Mexico. They're very similar architecture, except that the walls here are painted plaster over this volcanic rock, which is very stable and sturdy. Now, this is where you think it's all in the family. I like to say this is a family crypt across the street from the family compound. For centuries, the same family, extended family, has been living in this. Is just the entryway. You see, it's like a miniature Greek temple front, doesn't it? Behind that is a whole complex of several buildings, and I assume a couple dozen people were living there at any one time, including perhaps some live-in servants. And when one of their family members died, they just go across the street and put his body in the family crypt. That's what that is. And of course, they can go visit Uncle Mordecai or whatever his name was whenever they want, because he's right there within a few feet of the exit to their compound. And these are obviously Christian churches on the hill above. So this island has been 200 years ago, almost exactly, the Greeks kicked the Turks out and reclaimed their country for themselves. So let's go see what the island, volcanic island lip or ridge of the volcano looks like. As we get closer to the center of town, you might begin to notice, you see more churches and much bigger buildings. That's a 500-year-old church tower. I looked up some of this, but I've also talked to people. Most of the people there that were under, say, 40 spoke English, because they have so many tourists from the US and Canada and England every summer. And you can see the white stucco walls. That helps to keep things cooler than it would, but it's still quite hot. Okay, and here's the difference between relatively recent. That's about 100. Now it's close to 120 years old, probably around 1900, 1910. That's French Art Nouveau architecture, straight off the streets of Paris, or at a Paris apartment building. Having spent much time in Paris, I can tell you that's French Art Nouveau style of decorative grill work. So these are probably French tourist family or else it might be a Greek family that went to France and purchased these gates. But everything else here is hundreds of years old. These two churches here, this one and this one side by side, I guess they're competing. And then this is the unpainted, unplastered, wall of volcanic rock. And look how solid. That is, it's been standing stable for hundreds of years. They have earthquakes there, pretty serious ones, sometimes like a 6.5. I don't think they have one much bigger than that, but that's big enough to cause damage. So they do, and you'll see some evidence of that in a few more slides here. But now let's go. That's one of the churches on the outer edge of the island. Oh, I forgot I had this one. This is a graveyard. By the way, anybody been to New Orleans, you know about this. The graveyards in New Orleans, all of the tombs and the caskets and, you know, the human remains are not buried, interred above ground. Anybody know why?
Water.
Yes, the water table is so high. And when Katrina happened, not that was bad enough, Ida, but Katrina, 1,800 dead people. Among some of the bodies, in addition to the 1,800 live people that died in that tragic incident, several hundred bodies from cemeteries were pushed up out of, because the water rose so much in the flooding, of course, and were floating down the Mississippi. They took a trip long after they left this world. It's kind of tragic and ironic, but you know, that's why they do that. And it is same here. The water table is so high that the bodies have to be buried above the ground. Now let's go see where the volcanic lip is, because that's, here we go. This is the ridge of one of the most incredibly beautiful active volcanoes. No, it's not an active volcano. The earthquakes are happening because under the surface of the Mediterranean seabed, there's still volcanic activities. But this won't explode. Well, maybe it could, but the last I checked, it wasn't. And these are places that you can go to get the best home cooked meals. I mean, we were there only 3 days and nights, but every night we'd walk into town and you could dine out, and then it cools off, of course, in the night after the stars are out. Clearest sky I've ever seen anywhere. And the food was home cooked, and it was like, you know, $5 or $10 a person for a multi-course. I'm sure it's more than that now, but it was remarkable. The people were friendly. It was, like I said, one of my favorite experiences. This is the edge of that volcano that exploded. But if that's not enough to give you an idea, take a look at this. That's it. That's the entire island. Is about 50 miles from one end to the other of a giant lip of a former volcano that exploded 3,300 years ago as part of that set or series of natural disasters that destroyed what some historians believe is the basis for the legend of Atlantis. It makes sense to me. I don't see why it might not be that this prosperous, peaceful culture that was advanced, we know how, I already said the Minoans were ahead of in many ways, ahead of all the other ancient cultures, and didn't have any enemies. That it was a tragic story that would have been told for generations to the later Greeks, you know, as here's what happened to these wonderful predecessors that once occupied our islands. And that ship, by the way, that's not a, that ship has like, it's like a commuter ship, is like seating for 50 people. It's huge, this volcanic crater, and very deep. But of course, it's a plugged volcano, plugged as in by nature, from natural stone formed after the lava dried. And this is one way to get to the top if you want to in a hurry, rather than landing on the edge of the island and taking a bus or a bicycle or walking into town. Yeah, here's another view of the lip. And then we'll end up with a few more views to show you the evidence of what happens after centuries of slippage. See this church here? It's from about 400 years old, which would be older than any church in this country, except the ones in New Mexico. Some of the Catholic churches there were about from the early 1600s. But it's literally abandoned because it's not safe anymore. The last few earthquakes they had, see the damage, kind of rattled the parishioners, the worshipers. Probably if they happened during a ceremony, they wouldn't want to finish the prayers they were doing. So they abandoned the church, and it's been empty for decades, as I recall. But now we're going to go take a walk out to the edge of the island. Now I'll finish with about a half a dozen or so slides, eight or so, which are another lesson, object lesson, like I said, about the pyramids, that if you don't want to suffer, if you have, obviously, you're afraid of small spaces, right? Claustrophobic, don't go in those. Okay, so this is a modern townhouse on the way to the black sand beaches, which no one was there because guess what? It was 118 degrees that day. No shade. You see that? Almost no trees. This is a monastery that overlooks the beaches. And yes, they were allowing nude bathing. But that isn't the point. I just wanted to see I'd never seen black sand beaches. Nobody was on the beach for good reason. And my girlfriend then, at the time I was driving, said, you know, I'm not going all the way out there just to see a bunch of black sand, maybe some bathers, whatever. I'm turning around, going back to the pension where we stayed, and I'm going to catch the bus back to the ferry. We have return tickets in there at a set time. If you miss that bus, you'll miss the ferry. You'll be stuck here. So I said, oh, I'll make it. I almost didn't. And here are the reasons why. Now, there's that same site from a little further away in a different angle. No shade. I forgot to bring enough water. I brought one, bottle. I didn't have a canteen. I just had, spring water from a shop. This is an abandoned NATO army spot. I mean, the whole thing, the base was there, but this had been, I think it's like a factory that produced some of their weapons. So I decided to seek water. I was dying of thirst on the NATO base. Not a wise idea because they didn't know who I was from Adam, and I was not delirious yet, but probably starting to sound like that. Here's a church outside the walls of that. You see the barbed wire that marks the edge of this space. NATO, right? The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, they were a member of it. And so we gave them the planes and the weapons they had, and their own soldiers guarded this base. And I love this church. This looks like churches in Mexico, very much like the ones I've seen. And I've been all the way through the northern half of Mexico. 500-year-old churches we do have. That was in North America, but mostly south of the border with the crooked cross, right? And the plastered bell tower. But here's where I thought I was going to meet my maker. I couldn't get any water inside that base because when I found the gate, it was wide open. So, oh, good, I can walk in. And then there was a guard. And of course, he could have stopped and arrested me or just questioned me or done whatever. You could have shared water with me. He was sleeping. He was lying on the ground, sleeping in the shade from the guardhouse. And I realized if I wake him up, he's going to arrest me because I'm, making it obvious he's not doing his job. So I turned around and walked away. And about half an hour later, I fell to my knees and said, I need help somewhere. Somebody come along. I forgot to bring adequate sunshade and adequate water. Don't ever do that. And I should have guessed that I would have this problem. Just as about to get really seriously delirious, not quite, just on the cusp, a Mercedes air-conditioned car, or was it a BMW, with a British couple, tourist couple, was driving by. They saw me and they rolled their window down and said, could you use a ride, young man? Thank God. So I was able to get to the bus stop and meet my girlfriend, and we'll end up with the last 3 slides. Get on the ferry, and you'll see that as it leaves, just in time to get back to the mainland, but I almost didn't make it. Yeah, I forgot I had a few more views of this. Volcanic rocks, aren't they? It's just incredibly rich. Oh, and the donkeys. Don't rent a donkey. Donkeys will take off with your goods on the back, and you'll never see them or the things you put on their back. And your passport is held as hostage. So then you have to pay a fee of like $200 or $300 or $400 to get your passport back. People were cursing these donkeys everywhere I went across the island. Just carry your own stuff or maybe rent a moped. Okay, here we go, the last 2 views. This is on the way to the return, for the ferry back to the mainland. And you see there's the town we saw earlier and the volcanic rock. Look at all the different layers of it and stratus. And then finally, as we're heading out back to the mainland, here comes another boat just as we were leaving. One's coming in through that narrow little opening at the edge of this volcanic ridge that is the island of Santorini. Okay, I hope you all enjoyed those. Well, that ends us at what, 8:05? That's quite early, but I'm sticking around now, of course, for anybody who has questions. Let me go ahead and do the stop share here. Anybody have any questions about your papers, which are due, of course,
I have a
on
question.
Monday? Yes, please, go ahead.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Go ahead. Yes, I can hear you.
Regarding bull jumping Fresco from Canosos, because the animal is pictured in motion, does that make it dynamic, or is
Yes.
it?
Yeah,
Okay.
good point. Yes, that's part of why. And then also the body of the animal is all curved lines from the horns to the tail. So
Okay.
for both those reasons, it's totally dynamic. Yeah, absolutely. That's right. Okay. And also the acrobats. Well, the guy in the middle, the one that's a male, right, priest, he's totally dynamic because there's no straight lines. One of the 2 females, the one about to catch him, is standing upright. So you could, if you want to, say that one figure is mostly stable. Only her arms are reaching out to catch him. The other female figure is at a diagonal, and she's about to grab the bull's horns. I think she is actually. So it's almost entirely a dynamic image. Yeah. Okay.
I actually have another question regarding
Sure.
dynamic versus static. So if there's a sculpture, for example, I guess just like a cylinder, and then on the outside of it, there's pictures of there's just like dynamic pictures, but the sculpture itself is static just because it's a
Did he give me
Is
an
it-
example of one of the slides we've already seen? It doesn't have to be from this week.
just I'm trying to make a picture for you because it's not something that we've seen. It's just something that I sort of thought of
You
that
might be writing a paper about it, or
I
I'd
guess
have to see the image to be able to answer the question. That's the problem. Yeah. Unless you have it that you can hold up and I can click on your window and it'll show up big enough for everyone to see. If you have something like that, I can take
okay.
a
I'll try to find an example so I can show you better.
or you could also, yeah, if you can between now and when we sign off, or you could send me as an attachment and I can comment on it, just in a sentence or two or whatever. If you do with it as a PDF or a screenshot of an image that isn't from the syllabus, because I can't quite visualize. I think I understand the idea of your question, or the concept you're aiming for to clarify, but I'd have to see the actual work of art to be able to comment more specifically. All right, now there's plenty of time and we ended so early. Anybody have any other questions? Remember that if you joined us late, several people did, that you make sure you send your papers in before midnight. Don't wait till 11:58 or something. And that they need to, I'll do it again because they said I would. Here's how they have to be labeled. Obviously, this class is art 2.1, short paper, number 1, underline, of course, and then last name, comma, first name. And that has to be as a PDF, and you need to attach the cover sheet that I've sent everybody. It's a 1-page PDF. Hopefully that shouldn't be a problem to put that all into one file, one PDF file, in which the cover sheet's the first page, then your paper, then the bibliography, and usually the illustration goes last, but it doesn't matter if the illustration is before the bibliography. But the bibliography should be on a separate page, so it's clear that that's what you, and labeled that way. And you have, of course, the option again, if you weren't here at the start, I've said this, each of the last 2 weeks, but it'll be too late to do it next week. If you have a sample of the paper or portion of it that you've written, or even a draft, and you forward it to me no later than, say, Friday evening, hopefully sooner, I can get back to you. Would have to be Sunday though, because Saturday I do not check my email, and tell you if you're missing anything, as a bit of helpful feedback, for you to, if everything is good, or if you're missing something, I can state what it is you need to add. Okay. All right. Any questions about extra credit or anything else that we just talked about the slides?
I do have a question.
Sure.
Sorry, I forgot to ask at the beginning. Should we add to the tickets? For instance, I went to the museum this Sunday, but I forgot to add my class because I am enrolled in this class, and I forgot the number, but on the other class that you have earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So should I put
Oh.
just one class or?
Oh, did you? I'm sorry. Let me understand. Are you saying you sent me some kind of evidence of going to a museum this semester, and you forgot to say which class you're from?
Yes.
Okay, I can adjust for that. What you'll need to do is send me a follow-up email. So as soon as we sign off or whenever, I won't be able to look at it till tomorrow. It's been a long day. I do 2 of these Zoom lectures in a day. That's enough. So tomorrow, yes, Tuesday, I will be able to look at it sometime after lunch. And if you say, oh, I'm just reminding you of what I asked you, and I'm the one who sent whatever, and I'm in art 1.2 or 2.1, right?
Okay.
That way you'll get credit, and I'll confirm it. I will confirm so you know you did. It's worth 10 points. You can do a museum twice. So of course that means the next time you go to the museum, you'll probably remember to just put that in the actual file you send me. Now don't forget, it has to be either a PDF or a screenshot. If you send me one of those Google Docs or something, I can't open those. as far as
no,
the
no.
image of the text, I mean, of the ticket, right?
Mhm.
So if it was sent anything other than as a PDF, you might want to resend it.
Okay.
That might even be
Thank you.
easier anyway, because then you'll have your name and the actual in the same email, and it'll be faster for me to log you in and give you the 10 points if you have time. But if you don't, I can go back and look for the other.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure, I'll be happy to do that. Ohio State, that's where my father went, and several of my nephews, or nieces, sorry, not nieces, cousins. Yeah, Ohio State's a great school. Anybody else have any questions? Now's a good time to ask about. Yeah,
I'm curious if these lectures were available on YouTube.
yeah. Oh, yeah, I've
They
been
are,
saying that
right?
all semester,
I-
but not
I've
until
never-
Friday. Remember, each week's lectures for the two online classes I teach, this one and the 1.2. Of course, you don't want to waste time watching ones that you're not going to be tested on. So the ones for 2.1 are marked that way. This will be week 6, or 2.1, week 6 under, and then it'll say, Aegean Art under Mark Wilson's SRJC art history lectures. I've been saying that, but I'm happy to repeat that. And I have my own channel. So if you just Google that, you'll get right to it. And you'll see the slides from this week and any of the previous weeks, but not until after 8 p.m. on Friday, because it takes a while to download, because I have to give the morning or the afternoon class in 2 separate sections. It's one of those, I hate that, where they divide it up into 2.
I just wanted to double check that you were still adding them on.
Oh, yeah. No, I wouldn't stop. Yeah, unless
I was planning on using it. I just hadn't used it yet. I didn't know if
Okay.
anyone else was
It's
using
all
it.
there, and it's a good tool for you to review for the midterm and the final. Yeah, no, it's there. So, but not this week's. Well, each week I do it by usually 7 p.m. on Friday, and then I catch my breath and relax and watch a movie with my family. And Saturday's family day. So what I'm saying is it takes a while for it to post. So I've been telling people by 8 p.m. or anytime after that on Friday each week, you can see that week's lecture on YouTube. Unless there's something that went wrong, and knock on wood, I think one time something didn't record. I believe that was the very beginning of this semester. So I might have had to redo it, but I don't think I did. That was last semester. Yeah. It almost never fails. It's a good system. I must say, whoever designed it, user-friendly YouTube app is really someone I respect and admire, because if I can do it, anybody can do it. I didn't even know what YouTube was. No, I knew what it was, but I'd never used it until I started teaching. You can count on that. All right. From now on, you don't have to guess or ask. Just check by the end of that week, by 8 p.m. or later on Friday, you'll see that week's lecture. Okay. That's clear, I hope. Anybody else now? Any other questions? Now's a good time. Okay, again, your papers are due 1 week from tonight, so you should be well into the writing of them, and you can send me emails with questions or samples of the writing, and I'll get back to you, right, with some feedback if you do it by the end of the evening Friday. If you wait till Sunday night, that's cutting it too close. And extra credit at any point, of course, you can email me with questions. But anybody have any questions that I haven't already answered, again, about extra credit or tonight's slides? Anybody else? Okay. All right, then, you guys, good luck with the papers. Have a good week. I'll see you all 1 week from tonight, and I hope to see your papers in my inbox. If I were you, I'd want to get rid of them off my plate by the time class starts. But you do have until midnight, remember, on Monday, the 27th. Okay. Bye, everybody. Take care.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. You're welcome.